This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, the owner of the Crystal River Nuclear Power Plant will close it down permanently. Senator Marco Rubio will deliver the Republican response to the President's State of the Union speech. A new report is critical of what it calls corporate welfare here in Florida, and the state legislature is moving to allow charter schools to take over some unused public school buildings. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorai.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are Adam Smith is the political editor at the Tampa Bay Times. Steve Otto is a columnist at the Tampa Tribune. Paula Dockery is a former state senator and a Republican. And Barry Edwards is a political strategist and a Democrat. Thanks for coming. It's great to see you. Well, Duke Energy says it will permanently close the troubled Crystal River nuclear power plant. The plant is already offline, and do-it-yourself repairs to its concrete containment building were unsuccessful. In the time the plant has been offline, the repairs and replacement electricity have cost nearly $2 billion. Insurance will cover part of the cost, but customers will have to cover the rest. The process of closing the plant and decontaminating it is called decommissioning, and that could take anywhere from a few years to 60 years, depending on which course the company chooses. Now Duke will decide whether to build a new natural gas-fueled power plant to replace the power lost from the nuclear plant. Also in question, does the company go ahead with plans to build a new $24 billion nuclear plant in nearby Levy County? The impending shutdown of Crystal River will have a huge impact on the economy of Citrus County.
Obviously, this is a major impact. This will have a major impact on our community. There's no doubt about it. We're looking at everything that we spend money on and answering whether we should continue to do that or not. There comes a point, though, when we've got such a severe and substantial decline in a one-year period that we've got to look at all options.
Steve, this decision was kind of slow in coming. I think people in Citrus County feared the worst. They got the worst. It's going to impact Citrus County. Customers are going to be on the hook for a lot of money. What's your take on the shutdown?
I was talking to my wife about this last night. I said, think of Bela Lugosi. You all probably don't even remember Bela Lugosi.
I do.
The vampire who was dead and buried, but not really dead and buried. He's there. And that's what's, it's going to take 25 years to decommission this, so this is not going anywhere. It's going to cost, there's around 600 employees at the plant, and they're going to take about half of them and get rid of them. For Citrus County, that's an enormous cut. I happen to have a number of relatives who live around Citrus County, and the pay there is pretty good. Coming out of Crystal River.
A lot of these are union jobs at the plant.
They are, and it's one of the only decent paying jobs around there. So it is going to have a tremendous and long-term effect. As for moving to Levy County, I'm not sure it'll ever be built in Levy County. You're just going up one more county, even poorer than Citrus County. You got Bronson, I think, is the only town there. And the only thing it's known for is the Rosewood murders. And now they want to spend $24 billion on it. It's not going to happen.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is because this natural gas plant that's a replacement for the current Crystal River is going to cost $1.3 billion, and the new nuclear power plants in Levy are going to cost $24 billion. You wonder if you can build one for 1.3 or build the nukes for $24 billion.
You know, you throw these numbers out, and $1 billion here, $1 billion there. I don't know the difference. All I know is that the technology is not there. It just is not there. Now, they're forcing the ratepayers to shell out money in advance. This is kind of like the Fannie Mae thing that bought us all down 5 years ago.
For the nuclear power plants at Levy that haven't yet been built.
Hasn't even been there. If I'm a ratepayer for Florida Progress Duke, and I'm 75 years old, and they're telling me I have to invest X amount of dollars, I'm not going to be very happy about it.
Barry, what's your take on the shutdown of Crystal River?
Well, I think it's tragic, and it goes back. I think we need to step back and look at the forest from the trees. It's a matter of oversight, and the problem is, in 1978, we decided we had a referendum and the people voted 2-1 to keep an elected public service commission, but the legislature decided to co-opt that and go to the appointed one. And when you have major industries like this that can give lots of money, there's a perception at least that they own legislators. I think they gave $1.5 million for Progress Energy to the Republicans last year, and Power and Light a similar amount. And they gave very little to the Democrats. The Democrats were the ones crying for more regulation, the Republicans not. They didn't even hear the bills to repeal the nuclear recovery fee. Senator Fasano tried to do that in the Senate. They didn't allow that. Representative Nair in the House. So I think we need to step back and say, how can we get more oversight? Representative Dwight Dudley has a proposal from St. Petersburg that he wants an elected public service commission. Well, then people say, well, then the utilities will be able to put a lot of money into it. He's got a novel approach which allows you to have regional elections. So you divide the state up into 5 areas so people could actually campaign. So I think we need to say, why do we let ourselves get in this position, which is really a lack of oversight? We need to turn the Public Service Commission from a public service utility benefactor to the Public Service Commission.
Paul, let me ask you about that. If we went back to a system of elected public service commissioners in Florida, would that do away with the kind of problems that we saw with Crystal River?
Hard to tell. You know, once you go to an election, you try and take the politics out of it, but who's going to contribute to their elections and who's going to be well-financed and who are they going to be well-financed by? So it's hard to take politics out of politics. But I would say on the plant closing, I had hoped that they would have opted for the quicker cleanup, and that would have maybe provided jobs for those who are finding themselves without jobs. And your heart has to go out to those people who are going to be without jobs because of the plant closing, because those were good, well-paying jobs. The community as a whole is going to suffer. That's a big hit to their taxes. So I think Citrus County is looking at some tough times, and that's sad.
And you've talked about this quicker cleanup. It would take 5 to 10 years if they did it that way, but it looks like the company is opting for a 60-year decommissioning time, in which a good portion of that time they just let the nuclear reactors sit there.
Right, right. And they're looking at the difference between the cost that they have to bear at the front end versus the cost that they have to bear at the tail end. And of course, you always try to put those costs off, but it's my understanding it would actually be less expensive for them to do the cleanup ahead of time. It's just that they would have to come up with the cash up front.
Adam, Steve mentioned this advanced nuclear cost recovery fee, and it's become an issue in Tallahassee where some people want to see it repealed. But I'm wondering about the juice, and I'm talking about the political power of utility companies in Tallahassee, and Barry mentioned that a moment ago. Could you conceivably, consumers and citizens mount an effort to kind of do away with that advanced nuclear cost recovery?
Well, you know, in Tampa Bay, one of the more competitive house races, state house races, with Dwight Dudley won and ran largely against that recovery fee, which basically says people are going to have to fork out money for a nuclear power plant that may or not ever even be built. And I think, at least publicly, most legislators say, no, that's not really what we intended. So I think the political will is there to do it. But as we've seen in the last few years, maybe 10 years, the legislature's very pliant when it comes to the utilities. So we'll see. But
this closing down of the plant certainly gives a little impetus to the legislature to do away with that fee.
All right. Well, Florida Senator Marco Rubio will deliver the Republican response to the President's State of the Union address this coming Tuesday. And for the first time, the Republican response will be given in both English and Spanish. In selecting him, Republican leaders in Congress praised Rubio as a champion of growing the American middle class through limited government and free enterprise policies. Rubio has gained widespread attention as one of 4 Republican members of the Gang of 8, a bipartisan group of senators working on immigration reform. And the junior senator from Florida is viewed by many Republicans as the party's next big star and a good way to connect to Latino voters, the fastest-growing segment of the American population. So, Adam, is this a good move on the part of the Republican Party if they're trying to change their image and kind of reconnect with the way the demographics are shifting in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, the Republican Party is really in danger of being the party of older white men right now, and so there's a reason people are so enthusiastic about Marco Rubio, and it's not just his charisma, his conservatism, it's that he looks different. He's not your father's Republican. And you know, you look at the people who give these State of the Union responses; they tend to be the stars. Mitch Daniels, Jindal, Paul Ryan, and Rubio better hope he doesn't sound like that character on 30 Rock like Bobby Jindal did and helped set him back a few years.
Yeah, Paula, Marco Rubio's gotten a lot of good press this week on the cover of Time magazine. He is the rising star and the great Latino hope, if I could say that.
Absolutely, and I think that it's a very smart move on the part of two older white guys who are saying, you know, we need to put a different face on the Republican Party. And Marco is still relatively an unknown. People might have heard his name nationally, but people don't know where he is on that political spectrum. So he has this opportunity to go out front and be the kinder, gentler Republican Party.
And when you say the two older white guys, you're talking about the Republican leader in the House, Republican leader in the Senate. Barry, what about this idea, though, that the address that Rubio gives is going to be some in English, some in Spanish? For those folks out there that think that English is the official language of the U.S., does that present somewhat of a problem for Rubio if he does part of it in Spanish?
Well, he's walking a fine line, and I think he is attractive because he appeals to a constituency group that the Republicans need, the Hispanic constituency group, and he appeals at the margin. But the problem with, as he goes toward the middle or to the left, he alienates the Tea Party base, which is what got him elected governor. Senator. But he now needs to move to see how he can attract women's, minorities, and there's where he has some problems. Minorities, blacks, and Hispanics typically want opportunities for education. They want opportunities in health care, and you have young people, and he's to the right, far right of most of the young people, which they need to attract. He's wrong on gay rights for them. He's wrong on the reproductive rights to most young people, and he's wrong on science. Most young people believe in science, and when he was asked, even Jeb Bush responded critically when he said he didn't know how old the Earth was. So he is appealing as far as the face, but now we're going to get more of the details, and he has some real problems of finessing that, as does the whole Republican Party.
Unbelievable ability to both be an arch conservative, but not sound like a hard right conservative, and sound like a very reasonable, moderate, open-minded person.
Right.
And I think that's part of his appeal. I mean,
I went out to see him in Plant City a couple of years ago because I'd never seen him speak in person. And there was a Tea Party rally. It was in some little park on the outskirts of Plant City. And he showed up, and he had the coat and tie on and the prepared speech, and all of his people right behind him. And he looked at the crowd, and it was not that crowd. And he picked out just like that, and the notes went away, the tie came off, sleeves got rolled up. And he didn't speak in English or in Spanish. He spoke in Florida Cracker.
He can do that.
And I don't mean that in a demeaning sort of way. He knew what kind of a crowd he had, and he appealed to them, and he had them 2 minutes into his pocket. And it's a talent, and you don't learn that anywhere, but he has it. You're right, he is walking a fine line, and he doesn't want to be perceived as the Latino candidate because that's going to, I think, cut into a broader base.
What else does the Republican Party need to do? I mean, if it's putting up one of the most prominent Latino politicians in the country as the answer to the President's State of the Union address, I mean, they need to do more. What else do they need to do to reconnect?
Well, I mean, I think there's almost a universal acknowledgement among the leadership and the establishment of the party that they need to do some real soul-searching and change, certainly their image. And, you know, you've got people like Eric Cantor, Bobby Jindal saying we really need to change things. But you're not hearing really any specifics and policies they're talking about changing now. And I think at some point they've got to put some meat on the bones in terms of policy if they want to reach people.
Because a lot of the talk has been about changing the way the message is delivered, but not the message.
Not the message. And maybe you're seeing a little bit about with Marco Rubio, who's now he's got part of this immigration package with the Gang of Eight, and he's now embracing what he used to call a code for amnesty. And he's getting some backlash already.
Paul, what does the Republican Party need to do?
Adam is exactly right. The fact is that you can have a different face give the message, you can slightly change the words, you can change the tone, but the fact is that a lot of people, a lot of Republicans even, don't like the policies that have been coming out of the Republican Party for the last 4 or 5 years. So there needs to be some soul searching as to what direction the party should take the state and the country in, and that's what's missing. Is they're not listening to the voters, and the voters are speaking pretty pretty clearly.
Paul, if you were to recommend one thing they should change on, is there one issue that you would single out to say this is really holding us back as a Republican Party?
Well, on the state level, I've spoken out against a lot of issues. It's not because I was unhappy being a Republican. It was that I wanted my party to listen to what our voters are saying. They didn't want to see the voting changes. They didn't want early voting reduced. They didn't want to see education cut. They didn't want to see this merit pay plan. They didn't want to see parent trigger. They didn't want to see prison privatization. That's a lot of issues. And the fact is that the party is moving more towards industries and special interests than the people and the workers. It used to be that the Republican Party stood for teachers and firefighters and police officers. They feel abandoned by the party, and we need to win them back. But we need to win them back not with rhetoric, but by showing through policy that we understand what's good policy for the state.
Barry, how should the Republicans, I mean, you're a Democrat, but how would you give the Republicans some advice about how they could start to win more voters back?
Absolutely. I think Newt Gingrich said it back in 1994, ideas matter. They need to come up with substantive ideas. I think what Senator Dockery has said is the Republican Party, at least in Florida, has become wholly owned by various major contributing constituencies. And whether it be energy or banking or whatever, it all seems to go to very specialized special interests. They need to get back to the people and be pro-consumer, pro-environment. I don't know any Republican who's ever been elected on the West Coast here who wasn't pro-environment. So those issues sell. They sell to Republican voters, Democratic voters. They need to embrace ideas. They need to be grown-ups and look for a long-term approach rather than the immediate 1 2 year cycle of how they can raise money. Because if they don't, the Democrats will. Okay. And the Democrats will win.
Well, corporate welfare, or at least allegations of it, were in the news this week. A nonprofit group called Integrity Florida and a conservative advocacy group, Americans for Prosperity, blasted Florida's government for the hundreds of millions of dollars it gives to corporations. The money is given to companies that set up shop or expand jobs here in Florida. But according to the report, only about half the promised jobs have been created after the state gave out the millions of dollars in incentives. Enterprise Florida and Governor Rick Scott, who chairs the group's board, immediately fired back, claiming that the organization has been instrumental in bringing high-paying jobs to the state.
There is a totally different attitude now in our state, and the country's taking notice. I mean, you can go around the country now, and people are talking about the business community in Florida, not just tourism, not just a great place to retire, but this is a great place to do business.
Enterprise Florida's CEO slammed the report as tainted because it was funded by Americans for Prosperity, which is affiliated with the libertarian Koch brothers. Meantime, small business owners and activists challenged another kind of corporate welfare, a subsidy for road improvements that would help Bass Pro Shops build a megastore in eastern Hillsborough County. They want the county commission to reject the deal, saying that small businesses would never get that kind of help from county government. A final public hearing on the project is scheduled for later in February. So, Paul, let's go to Enterprise Florida. Does Florida get a good rate of return from Enterprise Florida?
I don't think so. And I've been a skeptic of using tax dollars for incentives to private industries. We have to prioritize how we spend our money. I don't think that gives us a good bang for the buck. But even fundamentally more important, I don't think that that's the function of government, is to take tax dollars from people and pick winners and losers in private industry. So I'm opposed to using them, but if we are using them, we need greater oversight and measurement of what's happening. And the reports I've seen thus far have shown that we've had some very risky investments, some people who did not create the jobs, some people who closed up shop and moved away. And so I don't think it's a good investment of our tax dollars.
And Steve, this year the governor is asking for almost 300 million more dollars for Enterprise Florida in his coming budget. It seems to me that this may be an issue where Tea Partiers, libertarians, and people on the left can all agree that this is not a good use of government money.
Well, governments, local, state, national governments, they have used this for forever. To say that this is something new is nuts. One problem I have is you throw out names like Enterprise and Integrity and Americans for Prosperity, and they all sound just wonderful, but nobody's watching them. Nobody really knows what goes on in these things. So,
well, there's not even that much transparency.
There's no transparency. No transparency. I have no idea. Now, Paula keeps an eye on them, and you're never going to get everything you ask for. But if you're going to get the big things, if you're going to get like USS Campbell thing downtown Tampa, somebody's going to have to step in and say, yeah, this is a great location for it. On the other hand, when you have something like the Big Bass outlet out in Brandon, which is really just another big box retail thing, who are we to say? Who's government to say, yes, let's put $6 million in road improvements?
Well, and when I tried to change the law to have greater transparency, I was told the reason we couldn't do that is trade secrets. Now, if you're using taxpayer dollars to fund something and they're going to hide behind trade secrets, you know, that just doesn't wash. But to the Integrity Florida portion of this story, Integrity Florida is a great organization that said somebody needs to be the watchdog of Florida government. We've had a lot of people go to prison. We've had a lot of ethical problems. Let's have somebody look over their shoulder, and they're doing a great job, and they're churning out some really good in-depth reports. The problem is, who's going to fund them? They've been trying to get little contributions here and there of $100, $50, but who's going to give that money? So I can see where it doesn't look good that somebody who agrees with the outcome of that report would be the funder of it, but on the other hand, who else is going to fund a watchdog organization?
Well, and Adam, let me ask you that question. Who else in Tallahassee would fund that kind of organization with some objectivity? Or
I don't think, you know, it's like anything. Who is truly objective? Everybody's got some self-interest. So you've got the Koch brothers, who are, you know, boogeymen to a lot of liberals and a lot of Democrats. But I don't hear anybody suggesting that the result of that report was anything but on target, or at least accurate and fair. And you read that report, it's pretty outrageous. They've got vendors that are getting money from Enterprise Florida and then going around and judging whether their executives should get bonuses, that sort of thing. It was a very valuable report.
But you did have a former editor from your newspaper, Martin Dykman, leave Integrity because he did not think it was a good idea to have something like the Koch brothers funding something like this.
And one thing, Senator Doctor, that we
And
do
I wonder how you feel George Soros funded.
we do a horrible job
Exactly the same.
of picking winners and losers. So we are not successful picking winners and losers. It's a huge drain on limited resources, but it also creates an uneven playing field for companies that have political connections that may or may not be a good benefit. And like the Bass Pro Shop, they're going to come here if they're going to make money, or they're not. When retail doesn't survive, and if we're going to run it like a business, let's have a contract. So you come here, you have to have so many jobs for so long, or you lose the resource.
Well, a move back by Governor Rick Scott to expand charter school education here in Florida is making its way through the legislature. It cleared a State House committee this week on a party line vote. The legislation creates more incentives for the profitable charter school industry. Republicans back the move, calling charter schools an important alternative for parents and students unhappy with traditional public schools.
I think choice is great for parents and students. I think it's very important to look at what are the things that will make a student most successful. If they have keen interest in something, then if they study through that, they can learn all sorts of things, and that really keeps their interest going.
It's vital that all children have the opportunity, regardless of how much money their parents have, regardless of where they live, regardless of the color of their skin, all parents should have the opportunity to make sure their children can thrive in the 21st century and get the jobs we need them to have to drive this economy.
Democrats and school district officials urged lawmakers not to move too quickly. The legislation, approved 8-5 by the panel, would require counties with empty or half-empty schools to offer those facilities at no cost to charter operators. So very quickly, just in a few seconds, charter schools, good idea that we're trying to expand them?
It's a good idea in concept, but the whole world of choice and things like that, they sound good in the ethereal net, but in the reality, there's a lot of problems. Number one, they don't have the same standards. They don't have to take all the students that a public school does. If they have a problem student, they can kick them out, keep the money. The last 2 years, all the PICO funding went to charter schools, and a charter school that fails after public dollars build it, the people that build it get to keep the dollars.
Okay.
Those are all problems.
Steve, just quickly, charter schools.
I just want to say, if they want to play by the rules and take taxpayers' money, they have to follow the rules.
All the rules, not just part of them.
All the rules. Yeah.
Well, before we go, we ask our panel members to tell us about one more major story from the past week. Steve, your other big story.
I went to the governor's lunch, and there's a lot of great stories there. They give out the Citizen of the Year, and this year was John Sykes, who gives tons of money to the community. But better than that, he's a selfless guy who actually puts himself in there. He personally goes out and mentors kids. He's down there at the Judeo-Christian Clinic. He's there at the Crisis Center. He's a real community person. He and his wife, Susan. So, it wasn't just money.
All right. Barry, you're the big story.
I think the big story of the next week or 2 weeks or a month is going to be the percolation in the Republican Party that Governor Scott put out the largest budget in Florida history, found $4 billion extra in revenue. Does he get a challenge from the right? Does he get a challenge from some of the Republican intelligentsia, like a Paula Dockery? That's what I think is going to be the interesting thing the next month or two.
Paula, your other big story?
Campaign finance reform. There's been a lot of move on the House side. They want to fundamentally change the way that we fund elections. I agree with Speaker Weatherford that candidates themselves should be more responsible for their message, should be able to raise more money, get rid of CCEs, but I also think you need to limit the interference by parties and other outside groups as well.
Adam, your other big story?
I'll say just before we went on the air, Paula Dockery all but said she will not be running for governor this time. But instead of that, I'll do a shameless plug. We have a story in the Tampa Bay Times this weekend about Doc Dockery, the worst half of Paula Dockery, and how a pioneering Republican in Florida is now a no party, an independent, and has a lot of thoughts about the state of the Republican Party today.
Very interesting. Adam, thanks a lot. Paula, thank you. Barry, thank you. And Steve, thank you. And thank you for watching Florida This Week. We want to hear from you. You can record a comment on our toll-free line. It's 1-800-335-9338, or write us at ftw@wedu.org. You can watch the show online on the wedu.org website beginning Monday morning. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And from all of us here at WEDU, have a great weekend.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.